For 10 years, Kang Min-ho, Korea's most dangerous mafia boss, never touched a woman twice. The doctors called him infertile. His enemies called him untouchable. Then came Jennifer Okoye, the Nigerian stripper he paid for one night and left before sunrise. 8 years later, 5 brilliant children walk into his empire holding DNA results that defy science. And when their mother follows, she's no longer a stripper, but a powerful CEO. Now, his enemies finally find 6 perfect ways to destroy him. Stay till the end for the suspense this story promises. Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories TV. Thank you for always coming back and showing support. Please like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It means a lot to me. The elevator doors opened on the 47th floor of Kang Tower at exactly 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, and 5 children stepped out like they owned the marble-lined corridor. The youngest security guard, Park Ji-woo, looked up from his desk and froze. Kids didn't just appear in the private executive wing of Seoul's most feared conglomerate. Not without appointments, not without parents, not without someone getting fired. "Stop right there," Ji-woo said, rising to his feet. His hand instinctively moved toward the radio clipped to his belt. The girl in front, she couldn't have been more than 8, tilted her head and studied him with dark eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "We're here to see Kang Min-ho," she said in perfect Korean, though her features suggested mixed heritage. "African and Asian," Ji-woo noted, his confusion deepening. "Mr. Kang doesn't see anyone without an appointment." Ji-woo's voice came out firmer than he felt. Something about these children unsettled him. They stood in formation, almost military in their precision. 2 boys, 3 girls, all dressed in expensive casual wear that screamed wealth and careful grooming. "He'll see us," the tallest boy said. He had his hands in his pockets, and there was something disturbingly confident in his posture. "We're his children." The words landed like a grenade in the pristine silence of the executive floor. Ji-woo's radio clattered against the desk. Behind him, Senior Director Choi, who had been reviewing reports, stood so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "What did you just say?" Choi's voice cut through the air like a blade. The same girl who had spoken first reached into her small backpack and pulled out a manila envelope. She walked forward with the kind of purposeful stride that belonged to someone used to being taken seriously, and placed it on Ji-woo's desk. "DNA results. Processed by 3 independent laboratories. We checked them ourselves to make sure there were no errors. The probability of paternity is 99.97%. Ji-woo's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The documents inside were official, stamped, notarized. 5 names: Zion Okoye, Naya Okoye, Leo Okoye, Mira Okoye, and Kira Okoye. Mother's name, Adaeze Okoye. Father's name, Kang Min-ho. "This is impossible," Choi whispered, but he was already reaching for the phone on Ji-woo's desk. "Mr. Kang cannot have children. It's medically—" "We exist," the second boy. "Leo, according to the papers," said simply. "That makes it possible." In his penthouse office 3 floors above, Kang Min-ho stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul's sprawling expanse. The city stretched before him like a kingdom he had conquered block by block, building by building, soul by soul. At 38, he had reached heights that made other men weep with envy. His pharmaceutical empire was merely the legitimate face of an operation that controlled everything from shipping lanes to politicians. He had wealth that could buy countries, power that could topple governments, and a reputation that made grown men check over their shoulders when his name was mentioned. He also had a doctor's diagnosis that had gutted him more thoroughly than any bullet ever could. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Sir, we have a situation." Min-ho didn't turn from the window. His reflection stared back at him. Sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, a face that had forgotten how to smile except when strategy demanded it. "Handle it, Choi." "Sir, you need to come to the security floor, now." Something in Choi's voice made Min-ho's instincts flare. In 20 years of working together, Choi had never sounded shaken. Not during the territorial war of 2019. Not when the Seoul police tried to raid their warehouses. Not when Min-ho's own father had tried to have him killed. "I'm on my way," Minho moved with the predatory grace of a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts before his 25th birthday. He took the private elevator down, his mind already running through possibilities. A breach in security, a threat from the Busan syndicate. Perhaps the Japanese were making another move on his shipping operations. What he found instead were 5 children sitting in his security office's waiting area, drinking juice boxes that someone had nervously provided. Minho stopped in the doorway. His right hand, Lee Tae-sung, stood nearby with an expression that could only be described as catastrophic confusion. Choi hovered by the desk, the manila envelope clutched in his hands like it might explode. "Sir," Choi began, but the tallest girl was already standing. She had her mother's curls, though Minho wouldn't realize that until much later. What struck him immediately was her posture. Straight-backed, fearless, looking at him like she was sizing up whether he was worthy of her time. "Kang Minho," she said, not as a question but as an identification. "We've been looking for you for 3 weeks. You're very hard to track down." "Who are you?" Minho's voice could have frozen fire. "I'm Naya. These are my siblings, Zion, Leo, Mira, and Kira. We're quintuplets. We're 8 years old, and according to every piece of genetic evidence we could compile, you're our biological father." The room held its breath. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. Outside, Seoul's traffic hummed, but in this moment the world had narrowed to 5 children and one impossible truth. Minho's mind raced through the implications with the speed that had kept him alive in a world designed to kill men like him. This was a con. It had to be. An elaborate scheme by rivals to destabilize him. Everyone knew he couldn't have children. The accident 10 years ago had been catastrophic. Internal injuries that the best surgeons in Seoul had barely managed to repair. The fertility specialist had been blunt. His chances of fathering a child were effectively 0. "I don't know who sent you," Minho said, his voice dropping to the register that preceded violence. "But you've made a mistake coming here." "No mistake," the boy identified as Zion said. He pulled out a tablet and walked forward with the same unnerving confidence his sister had displayed. "We did the research ourselves. We're quite intelligent. Gifted program since we were 5. We found a photo of you in our mother's lockbox. She didn't know we knew where she kept it. We ran facial recognition software, tracked your business holdings, cross-referenced property records, and narrowed down your location." Minho took the tablet. On the screen was a photo he hadn't seen in 10 years. Himself, younger, standing outside a club he'd frequented when he still believed the world held pleasures worth pursuing. The photo was slightly blurred, taken from a distance, but unmistakably him. "Our mother's name is Adaeze Okoye," the smallest girl, Kira, added. She had a softer voice than her siblings, but the same unsettling intensity. Though you might not remember her by that name. She used a different one when she worked at Club Azure. The name of the club hit Minho like a fist to the chest, but he kept his face immovable. Club Azure had been one of his holdings, a high-end establishment that catered to Seoul's elite and visiting dignitaries. He'd sold it years ago. The memories attached to it were deliberately buried. "I want a maternity and paternity test," Minho said flatly. "Independent laboratory, my choice of facility." "Already done," Naya said, pointing to the envelope Choi still held. 3 labs. We anticipated you'd be suspicious. We included hair samples, saliva, and blood work, all compared against your medical records from Seoul National University Hospital after your accident in 2014. The records we obtained through... How did you get my medical records? Minho's voice could have cut steel. The children exchanged glances. Leo shrugged. "We're very motivated. And possibly guilty of several felonies," Zion added, "but we figured you'd appreciate the initiative." For the first time in a decade, Kang Min-ho didn't know what to say. These children spoke like miniature adults, moved with coordination that suggested extensive planning, and had somehow accessed information that was supposed to be locked behind layers of security that cost him millions to maintain. Tae-sung cleared his throat. "Sir, I've reviewed the documents. They appear legitimate. The labs are real, internationally recognized. The signatures are notarized. If this is a fabrication, it's the most elaborate one I've ever seen." "Then find out who's behind it," Minho snapped. "We're behind it," Mira said. She was the quietest of the five, but when she spoke, her siblings fell silent. "We decided 3 months ago that we wanted to meet our father. Mother refused to tell us anything about you. She said it was better if we never knew, but we found the photo. We found the records. We found you." "Where is your mother now?" Minho asked, and something in his tone made Choi step closer, protective instincts activating. "At work," Naya said. "She thinks we're at an advanced coding workshop at Seoul National University. We'll be in significant trouble when she finds out we're here, but we decided the risk was worth it." Minho looked at each child in turn. They stared back with varying degrees of his own stubbornness reflected in their faces. If this was a con, it was being perpetrated by the most extraordinary child actors he'd ever encountered. If it wasn't a con... The thought died before it could fully form. It couldn't be real. The doctors had been certain. "What's your mother's phone number?" he asked. "Why?" Kira's eyes narrowed. "Because if you're really my children, then your mother and I need to have a conversation. Now." The children looked at each other in that silent communication way that twins, or apparently quintuplets, had. Finally, Zion pulled out a phone. "We can't give you her number, but we can call her and let you talk. Do it." Zion dialed. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered in English, warm and slightly distracted. "Zion, baby, you're supposed to be in class. Is everything okay?" "Mom," Zion said carefully, "we need to tell you something. Please don't be angry." The warmth drained from the voice instantly. "Where are you?" "We're at Kang Tower. We found our father. We're with him right now." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then came a sound like breaking glass and a voice unleashing a stream of words in what Min Ho recognized as Igbo, the tone unmistakably furious. The call disconnected. "She's coming," Mira said unnecessarily. "She's very angry." "How angry?" Taesung asked, already moving toward his own phone. All 5 children looked at him with identical expressions of sympathy. "We've never seen her this angry," Naya said. "You should probably prepare for that." 30 minutes later, the security system in the lobby alerted them to an arrival that made Ji-woo's earlier shock seem quaint. A fleet of 5 black Mercedes SUVs pulled up to Kang, Tower's entrance in formation that suggested military precision. The lead vehicle stopped, and 4 men in dark suits emerged. Private security, expensive and well-trained, based on the way they moved. Then she stepped out. Minho watched on the security monitors in his office, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the earth shift beneath his feet. The woman who emerged from the Mercedes wore a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hair, which had been wild curls in whatever distant memory he couldn't quite grasp, was styled in an elegant bun. She wore heels that added 3 inches to her height and walked like someone who owned every space she entered. Her guards flanked her as she strode through the lobby, and every person in her path instinctively moved aside. She was stunning. She was furious, and she was heading straight for the elevators. "Sir," Choi said urgently, "should we stop her?" Minho couldn't take his eyes off the screen. Something about her bearing, the set of her shoulders, the way she moved, it triggered memories he thought he'd successfully buried. Club Azure, a night he'd been trying to forget, a woman whose name he'd never actually learned because he'd deliberately avoided asking. "Let her up," he said quietly. The children had gathered by the windows, watching the street below with the resignation of people who knew exactly what storm was coming. They'd arranged themselves in order of height, youngest to oldest, a united front preparing for maternal wrath. The elevator chimed, the doors opened, and Adeze Okoya, though Minho still didn't know her name, walked onto the executive floor like she was storming a battlefield. She bypassed Choi, ignored Tae-seung's instinctive move to intercept, and walked straight to where her children stood. For a moment, the fury on her face cracked, revealing something raw and terrified beneath. She dropped to her knees and pulled all 5 of them into an embrace that made her guards politely look away. "Are you insane?" she whispered in English, her voice breaking. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "We're sorry, Amma," Kira said, muffled against her mother's shoulder, "but we had to meet him." "You had to—" Daisy pulled back, cupping each child's face in turn, checking for injury with the desperate precision of a mother who'd lived in fear. "You hacked into security systems. You falsified permissions. You came to the most dangerous man in Seoul and announced yourselves as his children. Do you understand what happens now? Do you understand what you've exposed yourselves to?" "We understand," Zion said quietly. "But he's our father. We had a right to know." Daisy's eyes closed. When they opened again, the raw fear had been locked away, replaced by the steel Min-ho was watching solidify in real time. She stood, smoothing her suit, and turned to face him for the first time. Their eyes met across 20 feet of marble floor, and the world caught fire. Min-ho saw recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like hate. She saw something in his expression that made her chin lift, her shoulders square, a warrior preparing for combat. "Adaize Okoye," she said, her English accented with Nigerian inflections he'd never heard before. "CEO of Okoye Technologies. And before you ask, yes, I'm the woman you spent one night with 10 years ago at Club Azure. No, I never told you my real name because men like you don't deserve real names. And yes, these are your children, though I'd rather cut out my own heart than admit it." The room seemed to contract. Choi made a strangled sound. Tae-sung's hand moved unconsciously toward his weapon. The children watched their parents with the intensity of scientists observing a volatile chemical reaction. Min-ho walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. He stopped 5 feet away from her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, far enough that his men wouldn't panic. Up close, she was even more striking. There was strength in every line of her face, power in the way she held her ground, despite facing a man whose reputation could make politicians weep. "I don't remember you," he said, and watched her flinch like he'd struck her. It was cruel, but Min-ho dealt in cruelty. It was his native language. "Of course you don't," Adaize said, her voice steady despite the pain that flickered in her eyes. "I was just another girl in a club full of them. You were just another client with too much money and not enough conscience." "Oma," Naya said warningly, but Adaize raised a hand. "They deserve to know what kind of man their father is," she said, her gaze never leaving Min-ho's face. "He's the kind who uses people and discards them, who takes what he wants and leaves nothing but wreckage. You wanted to meet him? Fine. You've met him. Now we're leaving." "You're not taking them anywhere," Min-ho said, his voice dropping into the register that preceded violence. "Until I verify that they're actually mine. You walk into my building with children and documents, but I've survived this long by trusting nothing and no one. For all I know, this is an elaborate scheme by the Busan Syndicate or the Japanese to create a weakness they can exploit." Adaize's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Trust me, Kang Min-ho. The last thing I want is any connection to you. I've spent 8 years building a life where my children would never have to know their father was the devil in a suit, but they're brilliant, curious, and stubborn, traits they clearly inherited from you. They found you despite every precaution I took, so here we are." "Then prove it," Min-ho said. "Independent testing, my doctors, my lab." "Fine," Adaize snapped. "Run your tests. When they come back positive, I expect you to sign away all parental rights immediately." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Min-ho's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to dictate terms. Watch me." Adaize turned back to her children. "We're leaving now." "Actually," Choi interjected carefully, "there's a complication." Everyone turned to look at him. He was holding his phone, his face pale. "Sir, the children's presence here has been noted. Security footage from the lobby shows them entering. There are already inquiries." Min-ho's jaw clenched. In his world, information was currency, and secrets were weapons. The fact that 5 children had walked into Kang Tower claiming to be his offspring would already be spreading through Seoul's underworld like wildfire. His enemies would be mobilizing, his allies would be calculating new angles, and his business rivals would be sharpening their knives. "This is your fault," Adazi said, her voice trembling with rage. "They were safe. They were unknown. Now you've painted a target on their backs." "They painted the target themselves when they hacked my security systems and walked through my doors," Minho shot back. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." Adazi's control finally cracked. "You think I wanted to raise 5 children alone? You think I wanted to build a company from nothing while pregnant with quintuplets, knowing their father was a monster who wouldn't remember my face? You think I wanted this?" The children had gone very quiet, watching their parents with wide eyes. Kira's hand found Mira's. Leo moved closer to Zion. Naya stood between her mother and father like she was trying to physically hold back the storm. Minho took a breath, forcing his legendary control back into place. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "We'll continue this discussion somewhere private. Tae-sung, clear conference room A. Choi, get Dr. Han from Seoul Medical. I want those DNA tests verified within 48 hours. "You'll have them in 24, Adaiz said coldly. "I don't intend to spend one more second in your presence than necessary." She gathered her children like precious cargo and swept toward the elevator, her guards forming a protective wall around them. Minho watched her go, his mind already racing through the catastrophic implications of the last hour. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off his view of the woman who'd just detonated his carefully constructed life, Minho heard Mira's small voice. "Is Daddy always that scary?" And Adaizi's response, soft but clear. "He's worse than scary, baby. He's dangerous, and we're never seeing him again." The doors closed. The office fell silent, and Kang Min-ho, the man who'd built an empire on the certainty that he could never be a father, stood frozen in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew. "Sir?" Tae-sung's voice came from somewhere distant. "What do you want to do?" Minho walked to the window, looking out over the city he'd conquered. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights and buildings, 5 children who might be his were driving away with a woman whose face he was starting to remember, in fragments. A night of unexpected softness in a life built on sharp edges. A moment where he'd let his guard down just enough to be human. "Find out everything about Adaize Okoye," he said finally, "where she lives, how she built her company, every detail of the last 10 years. And Tae-sung?" "Yes, sir?" "Quietly activate our security protocols. If those children are mine, they're now targets for every enemy I've made. I want surveillance on her property. I want her movements tracked. I want to know about threats before they materialize." "She'll see it as a violation," Tae-sung warned. "She already hates me," Minho said, his reflection staring back from the window glass. "At least she'll hate me while staying alive." He didn't add what he was thinking, that for the first time since the accident, since the diagnosis, since the doctor had carved away his hope of legacy, something in his chest had cracked open. Something that felt dangerously close to what other people called hope. And in Kang Min-ho's world, hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. 24 hours later, the DNA results came back. Dr. Han stood in Minho's office with the expression of a man witnessing a medical miracle. "The tests are conclusive," he said, his voice still tinged with disbelief. 5 separate tests, all showing 99.97% probability of paternity. "Sir, I don't understand how this is possible given your medical history, but those children are biologically yours." Minho sat motionless in his chair, the report in his hands feeling heavier than it should. 5 names, 5 lives. 5 impossible miracles that somehow existed despite every medical certainty that said they couldn't. "Could the original diagnosis have been wrong?" he asked. Dr. Han shook his head firmly. "I reviewed the imaging myself after your accident. The trauma was severe. The likelihood of natural conception was, for all practical purposes, 0. This shouldn't have been possible. And yet, Dr. Hahn echoed, Sir, these children are extraordinary. Genetically, statistically, medically, their existence defies probability. After Dr. Hahn left, Min-ho sat alone with the truth. He had children, 5 of them, brilliant, bold, genetically impossible children who'd hacked their way into his life with the same ruthless determination he'd used to build his empire. He reached for his phone, then stopped. What did you say to a woman you'd destroyed? How did you claim a relationship to children who'd been successfully hidden from your world for 8 years? The intercom buzzed. Sir, there's been an incident. Min-ho's blood went cold. What kind of incident? Someone tried to follow Miss Okoye's vehicle this morning. 3 cars, coordinated movement. Her security team lost them in Gangnam, but it was clearly a reconnaissance operation. So it had begun. His enemies had processed the information, calculated the angles, and decided that his potential heirs were weaknesses to be exploited. Children in his world were leverage, targets, bargaining chips for anyone ruthless enough to use them. Where is she now? Her company headquarters in Uedo. Sir, her security is good, but it's not equipped for the kind of threats she'll be facing now. Min-ho stood, decision crystallizing with the sharp clarity that had kept him alive through 2 decades of warfare. Get me 20 of our best men. Send them to her building. I want perimeter security established within the hour. Sir, she's not going to accept. I don't care what she accepts, Min-ho said flatly. Those children are mine. That makes them targets. And no one, not Busan, not the Japanese, not anyone, touches what's mine. It wasn't about asking permission. It was about survival. And if Daisy Okoye hated him for it, she could add it to the apparently extensive list of grievances she already harbored. Within 2 hours, Min-ho's security team had established a discreet perimeter around Okoye Technologies building. Black SUVs parked at strategic points, trained men in civilian clothes positioning themselves where they could respond to threats. It was protection, yes, but it was also a message. Kang Min-ho's reach extended even to places that wanted nothing to do with him. Daisy was in a board meeting when her head of security, Obina, interrupted with an urgent message. She excused herself, noting the curious glances from her executives, and followed Obina into the hallway. We have a situation, Obina said quietly. His usually calm demeanor was fractured with frustration. There are operatives surrounding the building, professional grade. At first, I thought it was the surveillance team from yesterday, but then I recognized the formation pattern. These are Kang's men. Adaze felt fury ignite in her chest like a living thing. He put security on us without asking? 20 men minimum. Maybe more I haven't spotted. Boss, I don't like this any more than you do, but... Obina hesitated. Yesterday's tale wasn't random curiosity. Whoever sent those cars was probing our defenses. Our team is good, but we're a tech company's private security. Kang's people are criminals. Adaze cut in sharply. They're criminals, Obina. I didn't build this company, didn't protect my children for 8 years, just to have their father wrap us in his bloody world. I understand. But Ma, those children are now known to be his. That changes everything. The enemies he's made, they'll see vulnerability. They'll strike. Adazi's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to storm back to Kang Tower and unleash 8 years of rage and fear and desperation on the man who'd managed to ruin her life twice. Once with a night of careless passion, and now by simply existing as the father her children had insisted on finding. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number Zion had used yesterday. It rang once before a crisp voice answered. Ms. Okoye, remove your men from my building, she said without preamble. Now. There was a pause. Then Kang Min-ho's voice, dangerously calm. No. This isn't a request. I don't want your protection. I don't want your men near my children. What you want is irrelevant. Minho said, his tone suggesting he was stating simple facts. Your security team is competent for corporate espionage and standard threats. They're not equipped for what's coming. 3 vehicles followed you this morning in a coordinated reconnaissance pattern. That was just the opening move. By now, at least 4 rival organizations will have confirmed that I have potential heirs. Do you understand what that means in my world? I understand it means you've destroyed my children's safety, Adeyezi said, her voice shaking with fury. They were safe before you. They were unknown, normal. Now they're targets because you exist. They became targets the moment they walked into my building. I didn't create this situation. Your brilliant, stubborn children did. But I'm sure as hell not going to let them die for their curiosity. You don't get to decide. I just did, Minho interrupted. My men stay. You can hate me for it. You can try to have them removed. But I guarantee you don't have the resources or connections to make that happen. So accept the protection or don't, but either way, it's not negotiable. Adeyezi wanted to throw the phone. She wanted to scream that she'd been managing without him just fine, that she'd built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing while raising 5 children alone, that she didn't need some criminal kingpin deciding what was best for her family. Instead, she forced her voice steady and said, "Stay away from us. Your men can lurk in the shadows if you insist, but you stay away from my children. If you have any decency, any love for them at all, you'll stay away." She disconnected before he could respond. That night, after she'd tucked all 5 children into bed and fielded their endless questions about their father with non-answers that satisfied no one, Adeyezi stood in her living room and finally let herself break. She'd held it together through the board meeting, through dinner, through Kira's tears and Zion's stoic worry, and Naya's attempts to apologize for the 1,000th time. Now, alone, she let the tears come. For the girl she'd been 10 years ago, desperate and alone in a foreign country. For the mother she'd become, fighting every day to give her children stability. For the future she'd built that was now cracking under the weight of a past she'd tried so hard to bury. She'd been Jennifer Okoye once, a Nigerian student who'd run out of money halfway through her scholarship and made choices she'd never imagined herself capable of. She'd worked at Club Azure for 3 months, hating every moment, saving every one, planning her escape. Then one night, a man had walked in who'd looked at her like she was human instead of decoration. He'd been dangerous even then. She'd known it instinctively. But there'd been something broken in him that matched something broken in her. One night. That's all it had been. One night where she'd chosen to be reckless, where she'd let herself imagine that maybe this cold, controlled man might see her as more than a transaction. He'd left before sunrise without a word, and she'd discovered 6 weeks later that one night of weakness had resulted in 5 impossible lives. She'd changed her name, not legally. Her citizenship document still read Jennifer Okoye, but she'd started going by her middle name, Adeyezi, everywhere that mattered. She'd built Okoye Technologies from a 1-room apartment with 3 computers and desperation as her primary resource. She'd coded through morning sickness, negotiated contracts while nursing quintuplets, and somehow turned a near impossible situation into something that resembled success. Her children were happy. They were safe. They were loved. And now, because they were too smart and too curious and too much like their father, all of that was at risk. Adeyezi's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Security shift change at 2 a.m. Don't be alarmed by the movement. They're mine. She deleted it without responding. But that night she didn't sleep. She watched the street from her window and saw the shadows of men she hadn't invited, protecting children from dangers she'd never wanted them to face. And she hated Kang Min-ho with an intensity that frightened her, because underneath the hate was something even more terrifying. A part of her remembered that night, remembered how he'd touched her like she mattered, how he'd kissed her like the world was ending, how for a few hours she'd felt seen instead of used. That girl was dead. Adeyezi had buried her along with the name Jennifer. but standing at the window at 3 in the morning, watching guards protect her children from threats born of their father's world, she felt the ghost of that girl stirring, and it filled her with a terror that had nothing to do with criminals and everything to do with the treacherous territory of her own heart. The next morning, Kang Min-ho arrived at Adaese's house in Pyeongchang-dong with an additional security detail that made her neighbors stare and her heart rate spike dangerously. She watched from her window as 20 more men in dark suits emerged from vehicles that probably cost more than most people's homes. They fanned out with military precision, establishing a perimeter that transformed her quiet residential street into something resembling a fortified compound. Adaeze was at the door before Min-ho could knock, fury radiating from every line of her body. She'd thrown on jeans and a simple shirt, her hair still damp from the shower, makeup free and past caring what she looked like. This was her home, her sanctuary, and he was violating it with his presence. "Get off my property," she said in English, her accent thickening with anger. Min-ho stood on her doorstep in a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage, looking like he owned the world and was merely allowing her to occupy a corner of it. Up close, in daylight, he was even more striking than she remembered. Sharp features, cold eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that seemed to consume all the air around him. "We need to talk," he said in Korean, his voice maddeningly calm. "No, we don't. You need to leave. Now. Your children's lives are in danger because of who I am. We need to discuss security arrangements, living situations, and—" "Living situations?" Adaese's voice rose despite her determination to remain controlled. "You think you're going to dictate where we live, who we are. You have no rights here." "I have every right," Min-ho said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register. "Those children are mine. DNA doesn't lie." "DNA is all you have," Adaeze shot back. "You're not their father. A father is someone who's there, who changes diapers and sits through colds and teaches them to read. You're a biological coincidence." Behind her, she heard movement. Moments later, all 5 children appeared in the doorway, drawn by their mother's raised voice. They stopped when they saw Min-ho, their faces lighting up with an excitement that made Adaeze want to weep. "Daddy," Kira said, the words sounding strange in her young voice. She started forward, but Adaeze caught her shoulder gently. "Go back inside, babies," Adaeze said softly. "But Amma, we want to—" Naya began. "Inside. Now. We'll talk about this later." The children exchanged glances, that silent communication that still unnerved Adaeze even after 8 years. They obeyed, but slowly, reluctantly, their eyes fixed on Min-ho like he was some kind of mystery they were desperate to solve. When they were gone, Adaeze turned back to Min-ho with renewed fury. "Don't you dare show up here and make them think you're going to be part of their lives. Don't give them hope about something that can never happen." "Why can't it happen?" Min-ho asked, and something in his voice made her pause. It wasn't quite curiosity. It was something rawer. "They're my children. They exist. That changes everything." "It changes nothing," Adaeze said, but her voice wavered. "You live in a world of violence and blood. I won't let my children anywhere near that. I've spent 8 years building a safe life for them. You don't get to destroy it just because biology says you contributed DNA." Min-ho was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I remember you now," he said finally. "Not your name, not the details, but I remember something. A girl who looked at me like I was human instead of a weapon." "That girl doesn't exist anymore," Adaeze said flatly. "You made sure of that when you left without a word." "I always left without a word. It was safer that way." "Safer for who? For everyone." Min-ho took a step closer, and Adaeze fought the instinct to retreat. "The night we met, I was being hunted by 3 rival organizations. Anyone connected to me was a liability. Leaving was the kindest thing I could have done." "How generous of you," Adaeze said bitterly. "You abandoned me pregnant with 5 children, but it was for my protection. Should I thank you?" You should have told me." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Adais laughed, sharp and painful. "Told you what? I didn't even know your real name. You were just another client at a club, and I was just another girl you paid for entertainment. What was I supposed to do? Track down the terrifying man who clearly wanted nothing to do with me and announce I was carrying his impossible children?" "They're not impossible anymore," Minho said quietly. "They're real. They're brilliant. They're mine." "They're mine," Adais countered. "I'm the one who carried them, who nearly died bringing them into this world, who worked 3 jobs while pregnant because I had nothing and no one, who built a company from a laptop in desperation so I could give them stability. You don't get to walk in now and claim them just because they share your DNA." "I'm not trying to take them from you," Minho said, and for the first time his control cracked slightly. "But I can't unknow them, and I can't let them be vulnerable. My enemies will use them to hurt me. That's not a maybe, it's a certainty. So either you accept my protection, or I'll be forced to take more drastic measures." "Like what?" Adais challenged. "Kidnapping? Forcing us into some compound? You think you can control me the way you control your criminal empire?" "I think I can keep you alive," Minho said flatly, "which is more than your security team can promise right now." Adais wanted to argue. She wanted to throw his arrogance back in his face. But Obina's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. These are Kang's people. They're on a different level. "I hate you," she said quietly. "I hate that you exist. I hate that my children found you. I hate that your world is now threatening theirs. Most of all, I hate that you're probably right about the danger." Minho's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Hate me all you want. Just stay alive long enough to do it." "Your men can stay," Adais conceded, each word tasting like poison. "But you need to stay away from my children. They don't need a father who deals in death. They need stability, normalcy, a life that doesn't include looking over their shoulders for assassins." "Normalcy ended the moment they walked into Kang Tower," Minho said. "I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry they exist, and I'm not sorry they found me." He turned to leave, and Adais should have let him go, should have closed the door and counted her small victory. Instead, words came out before she could stop them. "Did you ever think about that night?" Minho stopped at the edge of her driveway, his back to her. "No," he said finally. "I made it a practice not to think about things I couldn't afford to want." "And now?" He turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Now I think about 5 children who shouldn't exist, and the woman who somehow made the impossible happen while I was busy pretending I could never have anything worth protecting." Then he was gone, sliding into the back of a Mercedes that probably had bulletproof glass and reinforced panels. The convoy pulled away with the same precision it had arrived with, leaving only the permanent security detail that had transformed her quiet street into a fortress. Adais stood in her doorway, shaking with adrenaline and something she refused to name. Behind her, she heard small feet on the hardwood floor. All 5 children had gathered in the hallway, having obviously listened to every word. "Is Daddy coming back?" Kira asked softly. "I don't know, baby," Adais said honestly. She gathered them close, breathing in the familiar scent of their shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of their bodies against hers. "But whatever happens, I need you to understand something. I love you more than anything in this world. Everything I've done has been to keep you safe. Your father. He's a complicated man in a dangerous world. Knowing him comes with risks I never wanted you to face. But he's our father," Zion said, his young voice already carrying traces of Minho's stubbornness. "We have a right to know him." "Rights and safety aren't always the same thing." "We're not babies anymore, Amma," Naya added. "We understand there are risks, but we researched him for 3 months. We knew what kind of man he was before we went to find him. We decided it was worth it." Adais looked at her children, brilliant, brave, impossibly stubborn, and saw the future she'd tried so hard to prevent already taking shape. They were already like him in ways that terrified her: strategic thinkers, risk calculators, children who'd hacked corporate security systems because they'd decided the potential reward outweighed the danger. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Promise me you won't go looking for him again without telling me. No more surprises. No more secret missions. If you want to know your father, we do it carefully, slowly, with every possible protection in place." They promised, though Adaz knew with certainty that her brilliant children had already inherited their father's selective relationship with honesty. They would keep the promise in the letter while finding loopholes in the spirit. It was exactly what she would have done in their position. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Adaz sat in her home office and pulled up every piece of information she could find about Kang Min-ho. She'd avoided this research for 8 years, deliberately staying ignorant of the man who'd unknowingly fathered her children. But ignorance was no longer a luxury she could afford. What she found made her blood run cold. Kang Min-ho wasn't just a criminal, he was a legend. The kind of man whose name made hardened gangsters nervous. He'd taken control of his father's dying organization at 22 and transformed it into an empire that spanned pharmaceuticals, shipping, real estate, and a dozen other legitimate businesses that served as fronts for operations that remained carefully hidden from legal scrutiny. He'd survived 3 assassination attempts, been investigated by sole prosecutors twice, both times walking free when witnesses mysteriously recanted testimony. His reach extended to politicians, judges, police commissioners. He was untouchable, not because he was innocent, but because he'd made himself essential to too many powerful people. And now her children were connected to him. Now they were heirs to an empire built on violence and fear. Adaz closed her laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. How had her life come to this? She'd fought so hard to escape poverty, to build something clean and honest. Okoye Technologies had been her redemption, a company built on innovation and hard work, untainted by the circumstances of its founder's past. Now that past had returned with a vengeance, wearing an expensive suit and surrounded by armed guards. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. 3 cars attempted to breach your northern perimeter. They've been discouraged. Your children are safe. Discouraged. Such a clinical word for whatever violence Min-ho's men had deployed. Adaz felt sick. This was her life now. Nightly updates on threats neutralized, danger managed, violence perpetrated on her behalf. She didn't respond to the message, but she didn't delete it either. 3 days passed in tense silence. Min-ho didn't appear at her house again, but his presence was felt in the constant security rotation, the black SUVs that shadowed her vehicle whenever she left the compound, the subtle ways her life had been reorganized around protection she hadn't asked for. The children were restless. They asked about their father constantly. When could they see him again? Why couldn't he visit? Was he angry at them for finding him? Adaz deflected as best she could, but she could see their frustration building. On the 4th day, something shifted. Adaz was in her office at Okoye Technologies when her assistant, Ji-won, knocked urgently on her door. "Ma'am, there's a situation." Adaz looked up from the code she'd been reviewing. "What kind of situation?" "Han So-ri is downstairs demanding to see you." The name meant nothing to Adaz. "Who?" She's Kang Min-ho's fiancée, a model, very famous, and very angry." The word fiancé hit Adaz like a physical blow. Of course, Min-ho had a fiancé. Men like him collected beautiful women the way other people collected art. It shouldn't matter. She had no claim on him, wanted no claim on him. But something ugly twisted in her chest anyway. "Send her up," Adaz said, keeping her voice level. "And Ji-won, make sure Obina knows, just in case." 5 minutes later, Han So-ri swept into Adaz's office like she was walking a runway. She was stunning. Delicate features, perfect hair, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but her beauty was marred by the fury radiating from her like heat. So you're the whore who's been trying to trap Minho with bastard children, So-ri said in Korean, not bothering with pleasantries. Adais stood slowly, drawing herself to her full height. She'd faced down venture capitalists, hostile investors, and tech industry misogyny. She wasn't about to be intimidated by an angry model. I'm Adesi Okoye, CEO of this company, and you're in my office without an appointment. You have 30 seconds before security removes you. I know who you are, So-ri said, switching to English that was heavily accented but fluent. You're the stripper who got pregnant and is now trying to use children to get your claws into one of Seoul's most powerful men. I was a stripper for 3 months 10 years ago when I was a desperate student with no other options, Adais said calmly, though her pulse was racing. I'm not ashamed of what I did to survive. What I am is a successful businesswoman who built a company worth $200 million, and I don't want anything from Kang Min-ho except for him to stay away from my children. Liar, So-ri hissed. Women like you always want something. Money, status, power. You think you can use those brats to replace me? Those brats are his biological children, Adaizi said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Verified by 3 independent labs. I didn't ask for your fiancé to be their father. I didn't ask for any of this. So if you have a problem with the situation, take it up with him, not me. Oh, I intend to, So-ri said. But first, I wanted to see you. To see what kind of woman thought she could compete with me. And you know what I see? A former prostitute playing dress-up as a businesswoman. You can change your clothes and your title, but you can't change what you are. Adeze walked around her desk slowly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She stopped inches from So-ri, close enough that the other woman had to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact. You're right, Adeze said softly. I can't change what I was, but I can be proud of what I became despite it. Can you say the same? Or did you just wake up pretty and decide that was enough? So-ri's hand moved in a blur, aiming for Adese's face, but Adese had grown up in Lagos's rougher neighborhoods before her scholarship. She caught So-ri's wrist mid-swing, her grip firm enough to make the other woman wince. Don't, Adese said quietly. I fought too hard to build this life to let you or anyone else tear it down with petty drama. You want to fight for your man? Fine, but fight him, not me, because I promise you I want nothing to do with Kang Min-ho beyond keeping him as far from my children as possible. She released So-ri's wrist. The model stumbled back, cradling her arm, her perfect composure finally cracking. He's mine, she said, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. I've been with him for 3 years. I've built my life around him. You don't get to show up with children and destroy everything. For just a moment, Adese felt something like sympathy. She understood what it was like to have your life disrupted by Kang Min-ho's existence. I'm not trying to destroy anything, she said more gently. I'm trying to protect my children. If you love him, if you want a future with him, then talk to him. Make him understand that children don't fit into the life you're building together. Make him choose to stay away. Because that's what I want, too. So-ri studied her face like she was searching for lies. You really don't want him? I really don't want him, Adese confirmed. All I want is for my children to be safe and happy. And right now, connection to Kang Min-ho threatens both those things. So-ri nodded slowly, some of the fury draining from her expression. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. He's not going to stay away, you know. I've seen the way he's been since those children appeared. Something in him has changed, and when Min-ho wants something, he doesn't stop until he has it. Then you'll have to make him not want it, Adese said, because I'll fight him every step of the way. After So-ri left, Adese sank into her chair, adrenaline making her hands shake. She'd meant every word. She didn't want Min-ho in her life, but saying it and living it were different things, especially when she kept remembering the look in his eyes on her doorstep, the way he'd said he couldn't unknow his children, the way something in his carefully controlled expression had cracked when she'd told him she hated him. That night, The news broke. Someone, almost certainly So-Ri, had leaked information about Adazi's past. Not just that she'd worked at Club Azure, but photos. Old photos from the club's promotional materials, showing a younger Jennifer in the kind of revealing outfit that left nothing to imagination. The headline read, "Mafia King's Baby Mama. From strip club to CEO, the shocking truth about Kang Min-ho's secret children." Adaz watched her phone explode with notifications, watched the story spread across social media like wildfire, and felt something inside her break and reform into something harder. She'd been braced for this, the moment when her past would be weaponized against her. She'd just hoped it would come later, when she'd had time to prepare her children. "Amma?" Naya appeared in the doorway of Adaz's bedroom, where she'd retreated after putting the younger children to bed. Kids at school were asking about the news, about the photos. Adaz's heart clenched. "Come here, baby." Naya climbed onto the bed, and Adaz wrapped her arms around her daughter, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry people are talking." "Were you really a stripper?" Naya asked, her voice small. "Yes," Adaz said honestly, "for 3 months when I was 21 and desperate. I'd come to Korea on a scholarship, but the funding fell through. I had no money to get home, no family to help me. I needed to survive, and that was the job I could get." "Are you ashamed?" Adaz thought about the question carefully. "I'm not ashamed of doing what I had to do to survive, but I am sad that people will judge me for it, that they'll try to define me by the worst 3 months of my life instead of the 8 years I've spent building something good." "You're not defined by it," Naya said fiercely. "You're defined by everything you did after. You built a company. You raised us alone. You're the strongest person I know." Adazi felt tears threaten. "Thank you, baby. But you need to understand. This is going to get worse before it gets better. People will say cruel things. They'll judge us, judge you for who your father is and what I was. You and your siblings need to decide if you can handle that." "We can handle it," Naya said with absolute certainty. "We're Okoyes, and Okoyes are strong." The next morning brought a surprise. Adaizi's phone rang at 7 a.m. with a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a woman's crisp voice said, "Ms. Okoye, this is Park Min-jung from Channel 5 News. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to tell your story in your own words. I'm not interested in..." "Before you decline, you should know that the story is going to be told whether you participate or not. Right now, it's being framed as a scandal. Stripper traps Mafia King with secret babies. But you have a remarkable success story. Single mother builds tech empire while raising quintuplets. Nigerian woman breaks barriers in Korean business world. That's the narrative we'd like to explore." Adazi paused. "Why?" "Because it's a better story," Min-jung said simply, "and because I think you deserve the chance to control your own narrative." "I'll think about it." But before she could decide, social media made the decision for her. By midday, the Mother of Miracles was trending globally. Women, especially African women and mixed-race women living in Korea, had rallied around Adazi's story. They shared their own experiences of discrimination, survival, and triumph over circumstances that tried to define them. A prominent feminist blogger wrote, "Society wants to shame Adazi Okoye for the 3 months she spent surviving, but they're silent about the 8 years she spent thriving. She didn't trap anyone. She built an empire while raising 5 children alone. That's not a scandal. That's a miracle." Korean Nigerian women's groups organized solidarity events. Support Adiz became a counter-trend. Her company's stock, which had initially dipped when the scandal broke, recovered and then climbed as public sentiment shifted. So-Ri's attempt to destroy Adaz had backfired spectacularly. Instead of becoming a cautionary tale, Adaz had become a symbol of resilience. The shame So-Ri had tried to weaponize had transformed into something else entirely, a testament to survival, growth, and the power of refusing to be defined by others' judgments. But with visibility came new dangers. Threats started arriving. Emails, social media messages, letters to her office. Most were empty words from internet trolls, but some had the professional precision that suggested real danger. "We need to move you and the children," Obina said during an emergency security meeting. "The house is too exposed now. Too many people know where you live." "Move where?" Adaze demanded. "Uproot my children from their schools, their friends, their life. Because what? Because someone leaked photos from a decade ago? Because you're now one of the most talked about women in Korea," Obina said bluntly. "And your children's father is one of the most feared men in Asia. That combination makes you high-value targets." Before Adaze could respond, her phone buzzed. Another message from Min Ho's number. "I'm sending additional security to your home and office. Don't argue, this isn't negotiable anymore." Adaze stared at the message, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. She typed back, "Stop making decisions about my life without consulting me." His response was immediate. "Then start making better decisions about your safety. I've survived just fine without you for 8 years. You weren't a public figure with a target on your back 8 years ago." Adaze threw her phone on the desk hard enough that Obina winced. She wanted to scream. She wanted to gather her children and disappear somewhere Min Ho's world couldn't reach them. But there was nowhere to run now. The moment those 5 brilliant children had walked into Kong Tower, they'd tied their mother's fate irrevocably to their father's. "Fine," she said finally. "We'll accept enhanced security. But I'm not moving. This is my home. I won't let fear dictate where my children sleep." That decision would turn out to be both brave and foolish, though Adaze wouldn't know which until much later. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Min Ho sat in his penthouse at 2 in the morning, a glass of whiskey in his hand and surveillance feeds from Adaze's property playing on multiple screens. He'd been monitoring the feeds obsessively, a habit Tae-sung had noted with increasing concern. "Sir, you haven't slept properly in days," Tae-sung said from the doorway. "I've slept plenty." 3 hours a night isn't plenty. Tae-sung moved into the room, his usual deference tempered by genuine worry. "What are you looking for in those feeds?" "Threats," Min Ho said simply. But that wasn't entirely true. He was watching for threats, yes. But he was also watching her. The way she moved through her house like a warrior queen. The way she gathered her children close when she thought no one was watching. The way she stood on her balcony late at night, alone with thoughts he couldn't read. He'd watched the scandal unfold with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Fury at Sori for leaking the photos without his permission. Something like pride when Adaze had refused to be shamed. And underneath it all, a gnawing realization that the woman who'd borne his impossible children was far more remarkable than the fleeting memory he'd carried. "You're falling for her," Tae-sung observed quietly. "Don't be absurd. I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you watch anyone the way you watch her. You've deployed 40 men to protect a woman who hates you. You check the security feeds every 2 hours. You've turned down 3 business meetings because they conflicted with school pickup times. Not that you're going to those pickups, but you make sure our teams are positioned to respond if anything happens." Min Ho took another drink. "She's the mother of my children. That makes her important strategically." "She's making you human again," Tae-sung corrected, "and that terrifies you." Before Min Ho could respond, his phone rang. The head of the security team assigned to Adaze's property, a man named Kwon, spoke urgently. "Sir, we have a situation. 2 of the children are missing." Min Ho was on his feet instantly, the whiskey forgotten. "Explain." "Perimeter was breached at 01:47 hours. Silent alarm triggered. When we checked the house, 3 children were accounted for, Leo, Mira, and Kira. But Zion and Naya are gone. Their bedroom window was left open." "Has Ms. Okoye been notified? She's the one who discovered they were missing. She's not taking it well." Min Ho was already moving toward his private elevator. "Full lockdown on her property. Check traffic cameras within a 5-block radius. I want every available team mobilized. And Kwon, if anything happens to those children, everyone on that security detail will wish they'd never been born." He disconnected and turned to Tae-sing, who'd followed him. "Get the car. Now." The drive to Pyeongchang-dong took 12 minutes at speeds that would have gotten anyone else arrested. Min-ho's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. If this was a kidnapping, if his enemies had taken his children to use as leverage... He found Ada's in her living room, surrounded by his security team and her own guards. She was still in pajamas, her hair wild, her face stripped of the controlled composure he'd always seen. She looked raw, terrified, and younger than he'd realized, a mother whose worst nightmare had manifested. "Where are they?" she demanded the moment she saw him, her voice breaking. "Where are my babies?" "We're going to find them," Min-ho said, forcing his voice steady despite the unfamiliar panic clawing at his chest. "Kwon, report. Traffic cameras show 2 children matching their description heading south on foot at 01:52 hours. They were alone, no signs of coercion or pursuit. Sir, I don't think this was a kidnapping." "What?" Daisy's voice was strangled. "Then where? Why would they—" Min-ho was already pulling out his phone, a suspicion forming. He pulled up the tracking software his IT team had installed on various systems, including his own company's network. It was technically illegal, but legality had never been a primary concern. What he found made him close his eyes briefly. "They hacked into my security system. They're at Kang Tower." Daisy stared at him. "They what?" "They bypassed building security and are currently in my private office. They've been there for approximately 30 minutes. "How is that possible? They're 8 years old." "They're our 8-year-olds, Min-ho said, and despite everything, he felt something that might have been pride, which apparently means they inherited both our stubbornness and your technical skills. "This isn't funny." Daisy's voice rose to a near shout. "They could have been kidnapped, killed, hurt, but they weren't. They're safe in one of the most secure buildings in Seoul." Min-ho turned to Kwon. "Have someone bring Ms. Okoye's other children to the tower. They'll want to see their siblings are unharmed." "I'm going with them," Daisy said immediately. "And you're going to explain to me how 2 8-year-olds breached your supposedly impenetrable security." "They're brilliant," Min-ho said simply. "They got that from you. They got the recklessness from you." Adaz shot back, but some of the terror was fading from her face, replaced by fury and relief in equal measure. The convoy that arrived at Kang Tower 40 minutes later was larger than necessary, 3 vehicles for 5 people, but Min-ho wasn't taking chances. Adaz emerged from the middle vehicle still in pajamas, having refused to waste time changing. Her 3 younger children clutched her hands, their faces pale and worried. Min-ho led them to his private elevator, very aware of how close Adaizi stood, how she trembled slightly despite her attempts to project strength. In the confined space, he could smell her shampoo, something floral and clean that made him remember things he'd deliberately forgotten, like how she'd felt in his arms 10 years ago. How she'd laughed at something he'd said, a sound so genuine it had startled him. The elevator doors opened to his office where they found Zion and Naya sitting in his expensive leather chairs, looking remarkably calm for children who'd just terrified their mother. "Hi, Amma," Zion said, his voice small. "We can explain." Adaz crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled both children into an embrace so fierce that Min-ho saw them wince. She was crying now, soundless tears that tracked down her face as she checked them over for injuries with hands that shook. "Are you insane?" she finally managed. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? I thought you were taken. I thought you were hurt. I thought—" "We're sorry," Naya said, her own voice thick with tears. "But we had to talk to Daddy, and you kept saying he couldn't visit, so we figured if we came here—" "You figured you'd give me a heart attack," Adaz cut in. "You figured you'd risk your lives sneaking through Seoul in the middle of the night. What were you thinking?" "We were thinking we wanted to know our father," Zion said quietly. "And you were never going to let us." The words landed like a physical blow. Adaz pulled back, staring at her children with an expression that mixed hurt and understanding. "I was trying to protect you." "We know," Naya said. "But Amma, we don't need protection from him. We need to know him." Minho had been standing back, letting Adai's handle her children. But now he moved closer, crouching down so he was at eye level with Zion and Naya. "What you did was dangerous and foolish," he said, his voice firm. "Your mother is right to be angry, but I'm glad you're here." The admission cost him something. Minho didn't do vulnerability. He'd built his empire on projecting invincibility. But looking at these two children who'd risked everything just to talk to him, he found his legendary control fracturing. "Really?" Naya asked, hope lighting her face. "Really," Minho confirmed. "Though if you ever terrify your mother like this again, we're going to have problems. Understood?" Both children nodded quickly. Behind them, Leo, Mira, and Kira had crept closer, drawn by their father's presence despite their mother's obvious tension. "Can we ask you something?" Leo ventured. "Anything. Why didn't you come see us after you found out we existed? Don't you want us?" The question was asked with a child's directness, but it carried the weight of every abandonment fear Minho himself had carried as a boy. He glanced at Daisy, whose expression had gone carefully neutral. "Your mother asked me to stay away," Minho said honestly. "She thought, correctly, that my world is dangerous, that knowing me would put you at risk. I was trying to respect her wishes while keeping you safe from a distance." "But we want to know you," Kira said softly. "We don't care about the danger." "You should care about the danger," Adais cut in sharply. "You should care that your father's enemies might hurt you to hurt him. You should care that the life he leads is built on violence and fear." "We're already in danger," Zion pointed out with logic beyond his years. "The moment we found him, we became targets, so we might as well know him while we're at risk anyway." Daisy looked like she wanted to argue, but the words died on her lips. Because Zion was right. The damage was done. Her children were known. They were heirs to an empire they hadn't asked for. Keeping Minho away wouldn't make them safer. It would just deprive them of the one person whose resources could genuinely protect them. "This is your fault," she said to Minho, her voice shaking. "All of this is your fault." "I know," Minho said simply. "You've destroyed their innocence. You've painted targets on their backs. You've made them commodities for your enemies to exploit. I know. I hate you for it."